Welcome to Virtually Amazing Assistants, the podcast for assistants everywhere. If you've not met me before, my name is Shelley Fishel. I'm known as the MS Office Maestro, and I've been training assistants, business owners, organizations for over 25 years on Microsoft Office applications, and I still do that. However, I have a passion for assistants. I think you're all amazing. Businesses wouldn't work without you. And so I've created this podcast for assistants everywhere. Over the coming weeks, I'm going to be chatting each week with a different guest expert. We'll find out how they got to where they are, what they're up to now, and how they can help you. Tips and tricks abundant. We will learn loads. So that's me, Shelley Fishel. Enough of this introduction. In a moment, I'll be bringing on my guest. Hello and welcome to today's episode of Virtually Amazing Assistants, the podcast for assistants everywhere, with me, Shelley Fishel. Well, you heard the introduction, so I'm repeating myself there. So with me today is the amazing Irit Levy, who is an automation expert. She is passionate about automation, and like me, she loves technology. And Irit thinks that technology is a tool and it's only valuable if it's going to bring you if it's going to be useful. I've got my words all mixed up, but that doesn't matter. You get the gist. So Irit, have I missed anything out? Anything else you'd like to tell our listeners about what you do?
Pretty much got it. I like to focus more on the process rather than the tools because the tools change based on your needs. And so it's a matter of finding the right tool for your specific thing. And if we get hung up on a tool, then we're doing something wrong.
Yeah, it can just overtake you. You spend so much time trying to figure out the tool that you forget about what you're actually trying to achieve. I know I've gone down that route many, many, many times. So just for our listeners, how do I know Irit and why did I invite her onto the podcast? We were introduced by one of my other guests who I'm going to be interviewing in another episode called Annabelle Kay. And Annabelle met Irit through another guest, Haley Hudson, and it's all kind of one big circle of connections, which is a really cool thing because networking is how we build our businesses. It's no secret to my listeners. I'm a Microsoft applications trainer. I'm a freelance trainer. I have a small business. I go in and deliver training on Microsoft applications, but I still need to network. And you never know who can recommend you to somebody else. And I know that if I need any automation, I'm going to call Irit first. So that's kind of how we know. And I also attended an amazing businesswoman's networking event that Irit created, which I still think about. I just think it was awesome. So Irit, I'm intrigued by people's journeys and the stories behind how they got to where they are. So what made you focus on automation specifically? How did you get interested in that?
That is a wonderful question because when I started my business, it was not going to be that. I started my business coming off of being a product owner in a startup, and I figured, I'm good at project management. I'll just go into that. And I built an entire website and I started my LinkedIn presence and everything was about project management. I even got a job as a project manager. And very quickly I realized I don't want to be doing fractional project management. It sucks. It's really hard. You have too many bosses, too many things going on. There's no way that you can give it your all. But I did discover that all of these projects had something in common, and that was automation that was coming up. It was just starting, right? So Zapier, when I was still in the startup, Zapier had just started. I think its first automation was the ability to post something to social media. It was like, that was the first few steps, and I loved it, and I had a knack for it. In my past, I was an instructional designer. So for me, understanding a workflow, understanding how things work, it's the gift that I got from God, right? So I just see things. I see things in a flow chart. I see things as they should be. I see where are things going right, but where they're going wrong and how we can improve them. And so automation just sort of made sense. It just sort of got to that point.
That's amazing. So automation made sense and your first business was about project management. So how did you decide or how did you set up or start out your automation business? Because I think it's a really interesting story, because I know that you really bootstrapped it, didn't you?
Yeah. So January 12th, 2020, before COVID, I gave 1 month's notice to my boss. And I'd been at that startup for 5 years, and it was just like it wasn't going anywhere. I tried to leave a year earlier; it wasn't going to work. I come from a very public servant mindset family. Both my parents, my siblings, my husband—they're all public servants. And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to open my own business," and I'm like, "No, what are you talking about? Of course you're not." And my last day was February 12th, 2020, and the world stopped February 15th. And I turned to my husband and I said, nobody's going to hire now. I mean, seriously, the world has stopped. Everybody's worried about health. They're not going to hire employees. Let's start the business. So I talked to my accountant and I had less than $100. I had 300 shekels, which is what I paid my accountant. I told him, okay, go set up, the different things that you need, the paperwork, whatever, to open my business. And that was the budget that I had. And then 3 months in, I realized it wasn't going to be project management. It was going to be automation. I spoke to my copywriter. We tweaked the website a little bit. And it was pretty quick because after one job, you already know, okay, this is not where I want to go. And it sort of developed on its own, one project after another. What's really interesting is the first dollar I ever made had nothing to do with project management. It sort of had to do with the workflow. It was a newsletter. It was like something on MailChimp. And I hated MailChimp. I was posting about different tools for email marketing. And I kept saying, I hate MailChimp. Don't just do anything but MailChimp. And then somebody posted saying, so who knows MailChimp? And like 6 people tagged me. It was just so funny. And that was the first dollar I ever made, was off of doing a project for MailChimp, which is a tool I really hate.
That's really, really interesting. So, and so how did this setup go from your first project to more than one project and becoming a proper business?
So what's really interesting is I think you become a proper business when you define that you're a proper business. Because I could stay a freelancer, quote unquote, forever, right? I could decide I'm going to be a freelancer, and that's how I define myself. I go on Fiverr and I get gigs, or I go on Upwork and I get jobs or whatever. But for me, it was never about that. It was always about building this as a proper business. So a proper business needs a storefront, i.e., a website or a social presence. A proper business needs networking. You talked about that earlier. You need to expand your network. I was not looking at who I was connecting with at first. Really interesting story. Before I started on LinkedIn, I had 60 connections. I knew all of them. These are people that I had worked with. They were relatives. They were friends. They were people that I knew. And people were reaching out to me, and I was like, oh, I'm not going to accept this. I don't know who this person is, right? And I was like, no, I'm not accepting. I'm not accepting. But then once you start your business, it's all of a sudden, of course you don't know them. That's the whole idea. The purpose is to get to know new people. It's to speak with new people and to learn from them. And I remember splitting the network groups into 4. So the first one was people that I was going to learn from. The second one was people that I had sort of marked as potential target audience, target clients. The third one was people that you sort of just are friends with. You don't necessarily know that they're going to work with you, or you're not going to work with them, but you comment and you engage, and you become sort of online friends to a certain degree. They're the people, those are your network. That's your community. Those are the people that are going to engage on your posts and get them out and in front of other people, because they're going to expand to more networks. And it's real honest. It's not like a pod type, oh, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. You really develop these friendships. And I've gotten on coffee dates with some of these people. One of them, who was really amazing, when the war started in Israel, and I told him about how my youngest was dealing with the war, and he's a parenting, he's not really a parenting coach, he's a neurodivergent parenting coach. And he's like, come on, let's get on a call. I want to help you. And he sort of talked to me through how I can help my kids deal with it. That's the kind of network that you want. The fourth group is engaging with people who are big creators. They're never going to engage back. They're never going to write back unless you have like this amazing comment. But people will see your name. Other people will engage. And engaging on those kinds of posts just gives you name recognition. And I think
Absolutely.
what really helped me when I developed my business is I was never looking at numbers or at vanity metrics. I didn't need X number of dollars or X number of followers. That's not true. I did need an X number of followers because that's what pushed me up. But the number was never, I want to get to 100,000 followers. It was, oh, my previous boss had 3,000 followers and refused to post on LinkedIn because they were saving LinkedIn for something big, which is not how you do LinkedIn. Different discussion. But then I said, okay, I want to get to that 3,000 mark. So I always had, like, it was 500, then it was 3,000. Like, I always had that number. And I found someone who was more or less at the same stage as I was in development. And I always like compared to them. It was like internal. I needed that someone to pull you up. Like, how
Yeah.
runners run with someone who's a bit faster than them. But the purpose of the network was never just to have more numbers, more followers. And it became very quickly to have the right followers, to connect with the right kind of people, and to really get to know them. I'm not saying coffee chats. I don't get on a lot of coffee chats. I get on coffee chats with people that I sort of mark as, those are interesting people. I learn from them. I want to connect with them. But I get invited to coffee chats like 3 times a day. I'd be doing coffee all day.
Now, that wouldn't be a bad thing, would it? Coffee all day. That sounds really good. Based on all my training is based in a coffee shop. So that speaks to me. But I get you. I totally agree. For example, today is the first day of recording for this podcast. And I somehow have managed to book in 4 recording slots, which is quite a lot to get through, because obviously it's not just the recording, it's the editing and the social media and all the other stuff that's going to go with this to make this podcast reach out. And on that note, please share it with your friends and anybody who you think it's going to be interesting to. Our audience is assistants. Both and I, once upon a time, were administrative assistants many moons ago. And that's kind of how we got into doing what we do. I started automating a process actually in the job I was in, learned how to build a database, learned how to use Excel, and the rest, as they say, it's history. I ended up being a trainer. So it's really important to share, to network, to help each other out. And in the assistance community, they have a great tagline: collaboration, not competition. And I love that. I think it's so, so, so important. And going on back to the processes, Irit, because we've been talking at it from a small business point of view. But if you're working in a corporate environment, it's a large organization, you need a process there as well, I would imagine, wouldn't you?
The larger your business, the more you need the process. So if you're a
Yeah.
one-man show, you need a process just to get it out of your brain and make it easier so that you can get more done. But if you're bigger and you have a team of 10 people or 20 people, each person needs to know what they're doing, when they're doing it, how they're doing it, how long it's expected to take them. That's very important, how long it's expected to take them. Because if I think something's going to take 2 hours and you're already working on it for 2 days, there's a dissonance that needs to be sorted. Either I didn't give it enough
Yeah.
estimate, or you've been spending more time than needed, or probably somewhere in between. And with bigger companies, the complexity of the hierarchy is going to be so much so that if that's happening, that dissonance is happening, if you don't have a process that's tracking it, you're not going to know, which means that you're going to have so much money that's being wasted or not spent properly and not budgeted for. And so you really need to think of your process as a tool that is going to help you maximize your time, make the work more efficient. And I mean, in this day and age, you should be delegating to tools as much as you can.
Yeah.
All of the repetitive process, no copying and pasting. I mean, that happens in big businesses as well, because you put this tool in place, you get this huge project management tool, but it has this one feature that you don't think is important, and so you don't implement it. But it turns out that that's the thing that your teams need the most. So they're copying and pasting out into Excel, working in some sort of spreadsheet, and then pasting
Yeah.
it back into your system. Well, that's a waste of time, opening up human error, and definitely not the best use of the tools that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally, totally agree with that. So what mistakes have you made? Can you share any mistakes that you've made? Are you happy to share mistakes that you've made?
I've made so many mistakes. I think before I say what the mistakes are, because we'd be here for 3 hours and more, I think the most important thing is to understand that mistakes are a must. If you're not making mistakes, you're doing something wrong, which sounds like counterintuitive. What do you mean I'm doing something wrong if I'm not making mistakes? But the mistakes are where most of your growth is going to happen. You're I could share my mistakes and you can learn from them, I hope. But we all know we don't learn from the mistakes of others as much as we'd want to. We have to experience them ourselves, unfortunately. Not a good thing, but as it is. And and so if we look at the mistakes as stepping stones for our growth, then we understand that those are not mistakes, they're just lessons that we had to learn the hard way.
Yeah.
Everything that has to do with how to get paid, I've made every single mistake in the book. One of my first clients, who is a coach for accountants, and she said to me, she wanted me to implement some automation for her. And she said to me, okay, so what am I giving you as a deposit? I said, no, you can pay me in the end. She's like, no, you're taking a deposit for me. And she forced me to take a deposit. So I took a 10% deposit. And then that project she paid me for, but then the next project, she disappeared all of a sudden. And she was going through things
Oh,
in her business and in her life, and it happens to all of us. But that was a lesson for me because that 10% didn't cover half of what I did. She ended up paying me. I'm not saying she didn't, but still, I learned that the deposit you take in the beginning needs to be larger. And still, that wasn't enough. And then I had clients who I ran after for 6 months, or clients that refused to pay because they didn't want to complete the project. And they figured, well, if I'm not completing the project, then why should I pay you? The fact that I did most of the work and they're just not going to use it has nothing to do with it. And so then I learned, okay, I'm not making the final payment dependent on the deliverable. I'm doing it time based. So I can't take all up front because just the projects are really big and I want to help the people that I work with. So I split it into 2 or 3 payments depending on the sum. And it has nothing to do with the deliverables. And that actually I found lowers the pressure for me, and I don't mind that the project takes longer. I've been fully paid for it. Now, I'm not even thinking about money. I'm just thinking about how I can help them. Now, if any of your listeners actually do that based on what I've said, kudos to you. But you know what? Most are not going to. Most are going to say, oh no, my clients are different. They're going to pay me. I'm not worried. Be worried.
yeah. I totally get that. I mean, I think it's really also important to, when you start a new job, certainly for me, every time I take on a new client, we agree everything. Once it's all agreed and we know what I'm delivering and when I'm delivering it, because that's important, I send out booking terms which form the basis of a contract. And it says, I'm going to show up on Teams or Zoom or wherever at such and such a time. This is what's going to be delivered. This is how much it costs. And along with that goes an invoice. And for me, I get paid up front because all too often they can just say, I'm not going to show up. And if that happens, I've lost the time and I can't then offer that slot to somebody else. So I learned that, yeah, I need booking terms. I need to send an invoice, and I insist. And usually that works. If it's a very large project, then obviously we'll discuss terms. But for smaller ones, one-offs and things like that, always do it that way. And the assistants that I work with, my virtual assistant gets paid up front every month. We have set number of hours, and I pay her at the beginning of the month. At the end of I don't know, the end of the last month for the next month. It's up front anyway, and that way the pressure is off both of us.
Yeah, I
Definitely,
think I
chasing
like to
money is
treat the
horrid.
people that I work with the same respect that I'd like to get. So my VA gets paid the beginning of the month for the rest of the month, and then if we go over,
Yeah,
if there are any extra hours, because there can be if we have a very busy month, and we've talked about this, we've agreed upon this, and she'll tell me mid-month, okay, we're going to go over, which is fine. She'll just charge me for them in the beginning of the next month. But we've been working together for years, that there's that trust that we built between us. That's not going to happen from day one.
no, absolutely. So it's about setting out your boundaries and defining what you want, much like you said about how you defined your LinkedIn strategy, defining your business strategy and what you want and how you want to work. And this is a topic that crops up a lot, certainly for small business owners and even for agency owners. All of the processes around payment and getting paid. I see it in the groups I'm in, people are always asking questions about it. It's a biggie. So, do you have any tips as we draw to a close? Do you have any tips that you can share with our audience of all kinds of assistants? What could they be thinking of?
In what terms? What could they be thinking of what? In terms of
Sorry.
process, in terms of automation?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've actually written the question out. What three tips do you have to share about building your business? And what should we be looking at with regards to automation? So, should they be thinking, okay, today I'm going to become an assistant and I'm just going to put my name out there and see what happens? Or should they be defining a process before? That's
So,
kind of where I'm going with
okay.
it.
So, pre that, who is the target audience that you're targeting? So, assistants can be of assistance in various fields, in various industries, various types of assistants. So, what kind of assistant are you? Like, what kind of services do you provide? Are you doing more graphic stuff? Are you doing more scheduling? Are you doing more technical stuff? Are you a technical VA? And I think in today's day and age, everyone should have those technical skills. That's number one. So, what kind of assistant do you want to be? And then, who do you want to serve? That's the target audience. They go hand in hand because who you want to serve depends on what kind of assistance you're giving. So, who is it that you're serving? And then once you understand that, I would start with having a very clearly defined sales process. That's the first process every business owner needs, definitely a service provider like a virtual assistant. So how am I getting my clients? What is that process? What are the different entry points? Can they WhatsApp me or send me a text message somewhere else in social media DMs? Are they coming through email? Are they coming through a website? That's the entry point. What are the different stages in that sales process? And how are we moving them from one stage to the next? When they book a call, okay, they've booked a call, then I'm sending them a proposal or a contract or a statement of work. Again, every business is going to work
Yeah.
differently. Shelley, you described yours in a really great way, because once all the terms are agreed, you won't start before you outline them in a document and send it with the invoice. When are they paying you? That's the last step in the sales process. For me, a client is one only after they've paid, because too many times I've had people say,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, send me the invoice," and then something happens.
Yeah.
It's happened 3 times. 3 is too many in my book. So that's like that. For me, that doesn't mark it as one until they've paid. That's the first process you want. You don't have to write it out at first, but you have to be aware of what's going on. And the sooner you see the patterns emerge and write it out, the easier it will be for you to go through this process easily with the people that are reaching out to you. And you won't have to make it up as you go along every time. Oh, wait, what did I want to put in that proposal? Let's copy from here and copy from here. No, have a template. So the
Yeah.
sooner you have that sales process, the better. And the next process that I would put in place for virtual assistants or assistants in general, the next process is, how am I managing my clients? So I'm assuming you're going to be an assistant for multiple companies at once or multiple businesses at once and not just one client. If you're a business owner, again, if you're in-house, you're in-house. But if you're a business owner, you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. So have multiple clients. My husband, when I started my business, he taught me uh, there are three levels of clients. So one is that milking cow. That's a client, that's a return client. You have it every month. You know that the income from there is coming. It's based. We know how much is coming in, more or less. You know how much work we're going to be putting in, and we know what the work is going to be. That's the milking cow, and it's repetitive. The next is just ad hoc clients that are coming in and out every so often. They could be for larger projects or smaller projects. That's the group. That's the second group. And the final group is the rising star. So rising star is someone who may not be a milking cow yet, but they're starting, they're coming up, they're building their business, and you're helping them rise up from where they are now to where they want to be. And a rising star can either turn into a milking cow, which is really great, or they can be a recommender of you and your services for others down the road because of the name that they're building for themselves. So those are the 3 levels. And you want to know how to deal with clients so that they will become your biggest fan base and your ambassadors and recommend you to everyone. And really early on, the person that I never called her a milking cow just because I love her and I would never call her that. But the client that I had that was a repetitive client that was every month was someone that became a friend of mine. And now we meet offline for coffee, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, it's not, it, and we're no longer working together, but now we've just become friends. And she was from a referral. And so again, the sooner you get good word of mouth, the better it is. But don't base your business only on word of mouth, obviously.
No, there's so much. We could talk all day. I mean, when we chatted before, we found that we scheduled half an hour and spoke for an hour and a half. So I think we better start drawing this to a close. So just to my listeners, if you need any kind of automation, if you're a small business, middle-sized business, or even somebody working in house who wants to just throw around some ideas and needs some help with a project that you're doing, then do get in touch with Irit. Her social media will be within the show notes, so you'll be able to reach out. Look her up on LinkedIn. She shares fantastic content on LinkedIn, lovely stories every Friday, and lots of really useful things. In fact, this morning you shared a blog post about naming conventions, which I thought was really cool because I did read that one this morning. So do follow Irit and follow me. I'm Shelley Fishel, the MS Office Maestro, delivering Microsoft applications training to businesses, small and large, wherever you are in the world. And thank you, Irit, for joining me today on the podcast. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. I'm going to see you next week with my next guest on the Virtually Amazing Assistants podcast. And that's me, Shelley Fishel, the MS Office Maestro, signing off for this week.